Summer's here, and you can now get almost anything you need for your sunny days delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Well, you can't get a well-groomed lawn delivered, but you can get a chicken parmesan delivered. A cabana? That's a no. But a banana? That's a yes. A nice tan? Sorry, nope. But a box fan? Happily, yes. A day of sunshine? No. A box of fine wines? Yes. Uber Eats can definitely get you that. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now. Alcohol in select markets. Product availability may vary by region. See app for details.
What's new from Apple? There's the new iPhone 16 Pro, built for Apple Intelligence. And it comes with the all-new camera control, giving you an easier way to quickly access your camera tools. The new Apple Watch Series 10 has our biggest display and our thinnest design ever. And this? It's the sound of active noise cancellation, now available on one of 2 new AirPods 4 models. So quiet. Check out all of the new products and new features at apple.com. You can even buy yourself something new. See apple.com for product availability updates. Apple Intelligence coming this fall.
Thanks for listening to the Red Treehouse, where I tell scary stories to keep you up at night. You can listen to the Red Treehouse on your favorite streaming platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Be sure to follow, like, and subscribe. Oh, and leave a 5-star review. You can follow the Red Treehouse on social media, on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, X, Threads, and Facebook at Red Treehouse Pod. And now you can find the Red Treehouse on Patreon. Join the Red Treehouse community for as little as $3 per month and receive exclusive member benefits, including personal shoutouts, early access to episodes, bonus episodes, and more. Simply go to patreon.com/Red Treehouse. As always, if you have a scary story or topic you'd like me to feature on an upcoming episode, email redtreehousepod@gmail.com. Important note, sources for this episode can be found in the show notes. The Red Treehouse is dedicated to my dad. I love you, Pop. By now you know that I love everything scary, spooky, and terrifying. And so far on the Red Treehouse, I've covered a wide range of stories and topics. And the ones I'm about to cover are up there with the scariest. I've never been afraid of the dark. I don't turn on every light when I enter a space. I don't run up the stairs. I don't cover my head when I go to sleep. And I don't cover my eyes when watching something scary. But, and this is important, I'm not afraid of the dark when I'm inside a building. Being in the dark outside is another story altogether. When I'm outside, I don't like turning a dark corner. The shadows play tricks on my eyes and my mind. And I'm hyper-aware of every cracking branch, rustling leaf, and animal sound. It doesn't help that I live on a farm. I have no neighbors within a quarter mile, and our house is haunted. In some ways, these realities play on one of my deepest fears. Being stalked by an unknown someone or something shrouded in darkness. A someone or something that I can't see, but who I know is there. In this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're going to explore a genuinely scary phenomenon, the story of the Whistler. And rather than tell you the story in my own words, I'm going to read it straight from the Creepypasta Wiki. How would you react if while out in the woods, or on the water, or in your bedroom, you knew someone was out there, whistling and stalking your every move, but staying out of sight? I'll tell the stories. You decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Welcome to the Red Treehouse. Our first story of the Whistler, which may have been the original story, was posted 8 years ago by Reddit user BingBong1234. I've been waiting a long time to tell Reddit the full story of the Whistler. This story requires many details, but it is unexplainable, creepy, and 100% true. I also have video evidence. When I was about 8 years old, I was taking my dog for a walk through the neighborhood with my mom. It was maybe 11 p.m. We lived next to a swamp, woods area on the edge of our neighborhood in Lansing, Michigan. I remember it being very silent and slightly windy. From down in the swamp, we heard someone whistling at us. It sounded sort of like a bird, but each whistle was different enough where the lack of consistency made it human-like. The whistle sounded higher than lower. I can't really describe it. My mom had a concerned, slightly terrified look on her face and grabbed my hand and said that we should go inside quickly. I didn't understand because I was too young, but seeing my mom freak out made me freak out too. After a while, though, I kind of forgot about it. 2 years later, I was taking my dog out again late at night. There was a large bush that could easily obscure a person behind it just next to the front door. As I was finishing the walk, the whistling noise started again. Same pitches, same inconsistent human-like tones. As soon as I heard it, a chill went down my spine as I remembered exactly the feeling of seeing my mom, terrified, looking down into the swamp at something I couldn't see. Maybe she couldn't either. I ran inside as fast as possible. Years went by, and I thought about it less and less. I told only a handful of people, and eventually, it slipped my mind. Fast forward to last summer. I'm 24, and I started dating my girlfriend Sarah. We moved out to South Dakota for work. For Independence Day, we decided to go to Pierre, South Dakota and watch the fireworks along the bank of the Missouri River. There was a free camping spot behind a hospital where you could pitch your tent, hang out, and see the fireworks up the river. We were near the end of the campground, and there were very few people around us. As it was getting dark, the fireworks began. They were pretty far away, so the illumination they brought was very little. Thus, we had to sit right at the edge of the river to be able to see them. A huge thunderhead was moving in, and a storm was imminent, so the air seemed electric and the wind was picking up. The atmosphere was eerie, to say the least. The police boats herded all the other boats off of the river, and had left our area to do that somewhere else. Most of the other campers walked up the river to have a better view of the fireworks. But Sarah and I stayed back and were drinking PBR Tall Boys and kicking it. Suddenly, we heard the sound of a paddle methodically dipping into the water. We saw a figure steering a canoe about 20 meters offshore. Sarah decided to go get more beers from the car, leaving me alone to stare at this mystery person. And then, of course, they whistled at me. My entire body was frozen and covered in goosebumps. It was the exact same whistler from my childhood, more than a decade earlier. I looked at the figure, but it was much too dark to discern who it could be. They were wearing a hat. And when they were perpendicular to the shore from me, they stopped paddling, turned the canoe to face directly at me, and whistled right at me. I was so frightened I stood up and shouted at them, "Who are you?" They didn't say anything, just whistled a couple more times, turned the canoe 180 degrees, and paddled out of sight. I'm a videographer, so I already had my camera by my side and was taking video of the fireworks. As the canoe was almost out of sight, I grabbed my camera and got a shot of them whistling as they went away. When Sarah came back from getting beers, she was very confused as to why I was so freaked out. When I explained, she was freaked out a bit too. I was convinced we would both be murdered that night. How did this whistling person follow me after 14 years, all the way to South Dakota? Was it a coincidence? Why was it the same whistling noise? Who was that person and where did they go? So many questions still unanswered. To this day, I'm more afraid of being outside in the dark, where I might hear that whistling again. I'm open to any explanations. If there is interest, I will find a plug and edit a little video of the fireworks and the whistling noise, and the canoe disappearing. I'm in Uganda currently, and the internet is spotty where I am, so I'll do my best. First edit. Video is coming, I promise. Where I'm at in Uganda, the power goes out sometimes, so if you don't hear from me, either that happened, or the whistler finally got me. Edit 2. Okay, finally, I spent all afternoon uploading this video. When I was still getting shots of the fireworks, I heard the whistling starting. I was too afraid at that moment to point the camera directly at the canoe, so I just turned my microphone towards it and kept a low-key shot facing downriver towards the fireworks. If you wear headphones, you can hear it better. It's the 2-note whistle, high, then low. You can hear me ask my girlfriend, "Are you whistling? Is that you?" She said no, but I wasn't sure, so I told her stop it because I was getting scared. The last shot, I boosted the brightness as much as I could and still make out the person in the canoe. It looks like they're wearing a red sweater or something. Final edit. It's been a while and I apologize for that. I'm back in the US now and I asked my mom about it. I sat her down and played the video for her. She honestly doesn't remember anything like that happening. I wish I had something more exciting to say. Alas, it must remain a mystery. As if the story weren't creepy enough, here's the audio of the whistler. Listen carefully.
You whistling? Is it you? Stop it. The original post mentioned a link to the video.
You can find that link in the show notes. Our second story comes directly from the Creepypasta Wiki. Last year, at the beginning of June, my grandparents asked if I could house sit for them while they were away. They were really active in their old age. Since they had retired, they liked to go on these month-long trips around North America in their RV. They offered me some money to boot, and the promise of easy cash isn't something I often turn down, especially not when I'm unemployed. Plus, getting to spend a couple months in a nice 2-story house down by the beach, everything was lining up to make for a chill, awesome summer. A couple of days before I was set to take up residence in my grandfolks' house, my mom came into my room while I was packing. She touched me on the shoulder and said, a little weakly, "You know you can always come home if you change your mind about staying there." "I know, Mom," I replied, a little puzzled. She hugged me around the waist and put my head to her chest. "I love you, kid," she murmured. I thought she was just being overly emotional about not seeing me much for the next few months. In retrospect, I thought of a lot of things that turned out to be wrong. By the time I got to my grandparents' house, they had already started out on their trek around the country. There was a note on the dining room table telling me about where to find grocery stores in their neighborhood, some good local restaurants, cool things happening at the beach in the next few weeks. All pretty basic stuff. There was just one weird sentence at the very end. "If you see anything that looks amiss, it's probably that way for a reason." I would never have thought to connect those words to what they ended up pertaining to. But at the time, the strangeness of the phrasing didn't even register with me at all. I was just upset that they forgot to leave their Wi-Fi password. Then I remembered that they still use DSL, and that I'd have to plug my laptop into a cable to be able to connect to the internet. What is it about even the hippest grandparents being just behind the times enough to always leave at least one inconvenience when you go visit them? The first night at their place was pretty chill. I watched some TV and strolled around the neighborhood. It's one of those part beach, part forest kind of places, like someone stapled Brighton Beach into the middle of Montana. It was past dark when I got back, and I figured I might need to go to bed early and try to do some more exploring in the morning. I'm not usually a nature calls kind of guy, but when in Rome. After I locked up and turned out all the lights on the first floor, I went up the stairs to do the same for the second floor. That's when I noticed something peculiar. My grandparents had left the light on in the guest room. Easy enough mistake to make, I figured. Who doesn't forget to turn the light out in the room every so often? I flicked it off and went to sleep in their bed across the hall. I was willing to push past the idea of sleeping somewhere that had hosted grandparent sex out of my head in order to take advantage of their comfy queen-size bed. A digression, but an important one. My mom and I never slept over at our grandparents' house when I was young. Well, that's not entirely true. The rare nights that we would sleep over, we would sleep in their RV, me in the bed and her on the couch. I didn't think much of it at the time, since getting to sleep in a big car is something any little boy would find perfectly agreeable. The novelty wore off as I got older, though, and when I turned 13, I asked my mom if we could maybe just sleep in the guest room the next time we went to visit Grandma and Grandpa. Maybe. Sure, I remember her muttering. I hadn't visited my grandparents since. Sometimes they would come to see us for important events like birthdays and graduation and stuff like that. But I hadn't slept over on their grounds for nearly a decade before I took this house-sitting job. Now, as I said, the first night was perfectly chill. You could even extend that statement to account for the first week. I took in the beauty of nature, vegged out watching YouTube clips on their mediocre DSL connection, even met a couple of girls down on the beach. I didn't expect them to call me, but sometimes just the fun of flirting can make up for the lack of results, at least for me. The Grant folks had a big collection of old Flash comics from the 50s and 60s in their guest room, so sometimes I'd end the night by reading a stack of them, shutting the light out, and going to bed. Again, a perfectly normal, unremarkable first week. Then, I heard the whistling. I was up in my grandparents' bedroom cruising the internet at around 2:30 in the morning. That's where their internet connection is based. I think I was reading a Cracked article about funny video game glitches when I heard a very soft, but very distinct, high-pitched noise for about 3 seconds. I don't think I even turned my head when I heard it, thinking it must have been some goofy night bird. But then an hour later it started again. It was too tuneful, too specifically melodic to have come from a bird, and it must have lasted for at least a solid, uninterrupted minute. I thought maybe an ad was playing on my laptop, but I checked the speakers and they were turned off. Right as I started to rise out of my chair, the whistling faded out, almost like an inappropriate laugh does. I closed my computer, locked the door of the room, and went to bed, unnerved. The next couple of nights I had gone to sleep early, but 4 nights after I heard the whistling sound, it happened again. I was lying in bed at 2:45, trying to get to sleep, when the same tune as before started looping. But it was a little louder than last time, and it didn't stop. I knew I wasn't imagining it. It was responding to the acoustics of the hallway, the same way I heard any voice do the same when I was younger. The sound wasn't only real, it was in the house, right on the other side of the wall. I was rigid in bed, too freaked to even breathe, until the sun came up after a grueling 5 hours. Where have I heard that song before? Was the only thing I had in my head when I woke up from a miserable sleep. I walked around the beach whistling it to myself in frustration for a couple of hours before it finally hit me. Sitting on the Dock of the Bay by Otis Redding. Something in my grandparents' house had been repeating the whistle refrain from sitting on the dock of the bay all night long. I went back immediately and checked all the windows on the second story. They were locked tight. My grandparents had a security system, so I couldn't imagine anyone getting in very easily. But even if someone had broken in, they didn't take anything. Who would go to the trouble of bypassing a security system just to walk up to the second floor, stand in one place, whistle sitting on the dock of the bay for hours, and then leave when the sun came up? Unless they didn't leave. I ran down to the kitchen to grab a knife, and then scramble searched every room and every closet. Looked under every bed, checked behind drawers and under the couch, and behind the TV. There was nothing to suggest anyone besides myself had been here over the last couple of weeks. Nothing, except the whistling. That night I mustered my courage and decided to try something. An experiment. I stayed on the internet until about 3 a.m. Sure as shooting, I started to hear the whistling again. And just like last night, it was the same song, but it was louder than it was the previous night, now almost to the volume of a full normal voice. After the refrain was repeated a couple of times, I matched the whistle. As soon as the first half of the riff ended, the high part, I whistled, as clearly as I could manage, the second half. the low part. After I matched the whistle, there was silence for a moment. Then the whistling came back. But it was not sitting on the dock of the bay. And it was not quiet. It started out as an even pitch, very low, lower than I thought it was possible to whistle. Then slowly the pitch rose over the course of a couple of minutes, higher and higher and higher until it turned into a piercing shriek. It was not an even tone now. It was stop and start, almost like someone was belting it out between short, sharp breaths, and it was ear-splittingly high. Worse still, the noise got slightly louder and slightly quieter over the course of the night, in rapid intervals, which led me to believe that whatever was doing this was running up and down the hallway, passing in front of my room every few seconds. Except I never heard footsteps, and I never saw a shadow under the door. This furious oscillating scream lasted for hours and hours. I sat in the far corner of the room, clutching my knife and covering my ears, keeping my eyes clamped shut. Right as I was considering killing myself, just so the noise would stop tormenting me, the sun began its ascent over the beach, and the siren noise faded away. I slept for 3 useless, nightmare-riddled hours. I knew my mom had lived in this house until she was old enough to leave home. And as far as I knew, my grandparents had lived here most of their lives. They had to have known about this nightmare, this haunting. How had they been able to tolerate it? And if they knew they had some horrible paranormal entity residing on their grounds, why had my grandparents kept asking us to come back over and over again throughout the years? These were the questions I asked myself all day. I tried to spend as much time on the beach as possible that day, even tolerating the overpriced burgers at the snack shack, just so I wouldn't have to go back to the house to make something. In my mind, I reasoned that my mom and grandparents had to have done something to make that place livable. They had to have found a way to coexist with whatever it was that lived there too. Then I remembered. The light in the guest room. Everything made sense all of a sudden. I went back and turned the guest room light on. And, just for safety, I turned on every single light on the top and bottom floor. My understanding of whatever this thing's logic was led me to think that it couldn't come out if there were lights on. And since it lived in the guest room, it wouldn't be able to leave if the lights were on everywhere. Even though I'd have to adjust to sleeping with the lights on in my grandparents' room, I figured I'd found a way to make this thing's presence a non-issue. My grandparents could deduct the whomping electric bill out of my salary for all I cared. It happened later than it had before, at 4 a.m, and at a boisterous volume. The next song it decided to whistle was the vocal melody to My Favorite Things from The Sound of Music. That fucker. Not only did it change its tune, it lulled me into a false sense of security, thinking that I'd beat it after it failed to show up at the same time it had in the past. But it whistled, and the lights burned on, and the sun rose, and I gave serious thought to drowning myself in the ocean. Maybe it was a mistake to have engaged with it, and that was why it wouldn't leave now, even with the lights on. Maybe when I addressed it, I invited it into the house proper. I never figured it out for certain, because I was never able to make it stop. I didn't make the mistake of responding to it a second time, so it never changed songs again, and it always started around 4 a.m. My favorite things. All morning. Every morning. as performed by a murderous, wrathful spirit. For a while, I came up with a consistent way to bypass it. I would just go to sleep early and pray to God that I wouldn't wake up between 3 and 4. And that actually worked for a little while. If I went to bed around 10 and slept through the night, I didn't hear the whistling, and no harm came to me. For the most part, this idea worked out for me for a couple of weeks. Then one morning around 9 a.m., in the middle of July, I woke up and my door was open, just a crack. I had shut and locked my door every single night for a month. I remembered the sound of the door shutting and the lock clacking every night before I went to bed, including the night where the thing had opened my door. Did it stare at me while I slept? Did it sing me a lullaby? This was the last straw. I sat up and broke down crying. I had run out of strategies. I had run out of battle plans. And I had run out of appeasements. Now the thing was just toying with me, mocking me, showing me it could get to me whenever it wanted, asleep or awake, lights on or lights off. "What do you want?" I screamed in agonized terror. "What can I do?" Nothing responded, of course. It was the morning, and the thing wasn't out and about yet, to my knowledge. Groggily, miserably, I dragged myself out of bed. When I got to the hall, I saw that the door to the guest room was cracked open. I had kept it closed, locked from the outside for the last month like I had done for every other room. Why did it open that door too? What could it... Oh, of course. I understood. I had a normal day. I ate my breakfast. I strolled through the woods. I took a great picture of the sunset over the ocean. And when I got back, I watched adults swim until around 2 in the morning. Then I went up the stairs and I got into my pajamas. I brushed my teeth and went to the bathroom. I went into the guest room, got under the covers, and went to sleep. The whistling stopped completely. For the rest of the time, I was at my grandparents' house. When my mom came to pick me up at the end of August, I told her I had had a great time. On the drive back home, she told me that Grandma and Grandpa had sent me the money for the house sitting with a simple handwritten note that said thanks. She hadn't been able to get in contact with them over the phone for the last couple of weeks. But when she last called, they said they were in Colorado and having a great time. A month later, my grandparents still hadn't come back. A month later, the whistling started again. I was in my bed, trying to go to sleep when I heard it. "Fly Me to the Moon" by Frank Sinatra, just outside my door. I think my mom heard it too. I heard her crying. Not this, I think I heard her sob. Not here. Not again. Please. I saw my mom at the dining room table the next morning, pale and haggard. She had not slept, looking at me with a mix of panic, exhaustion, and fear. It is an expression I imagine she wore many times when she was young. "Kid," she whispered, "what did you do?" I looked at her, wanting to cry, heavy with guilt. Then I looked at the table. My money was on it, next to the envelope, and next to the envelope was my grandparents' note. "Thanks." Oh no. Kid. I suddenly understood why they had invited us to sleep over so many times all those years ago. Thanks. Why they always tried to make the guest room look so clean and nice for us. Why they always assured us it was the most comfortable bed in the house. Thanks. And why I was so very sure that they would never come home from their RV trip for as long as they lived. What did you do? I don't know about you, but something about these stories really creep me the hell out. And here's the thing. I can't pinpoint exactly what creeps me out more. But I'll tell you one thing. If I heard whistling, either out in my hallway or out in the woods, I'd set a speed record, getting as far away from it as I can. For a while, I've thought about why we love scary stories and why we seek out fear. And as it turns out, there might be a scientific reason behind it. An article from the University of Queensland stated, quote, "Horror stories do different things to different people. In some cases, they act as cautionary tales. In others, they allow us to explore things that feel transgressive and gives us a safe space to do that." End quote. I think there's something to this, particularly when it comes to horror movies and scary stories. Because I'm a firm believer that horror allows us an opportunity to explore thoughts, feelings, and experiences that we would otherwise turn away from. It can be an incredibly effective communication tool. For me, the stories of the Whistler press in on my darkest fears and serve as a cautionary tale. For others, the stories may evoke a different emotion. And still for others, these stories may evoke no emotion at all. And that's the beauty of it. Each of us is affected differently. As we close this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're left with this lingering question. How would you react if while out in the woods, or on the water, or in your bedroom, you knew someone was out there, stalking your every move, but staying out of sight? I've shared the stories. Now you decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Thanks for joining me in the Red Treehouse.